So what would be the general process of creating a design system with kickstartDS? We've tried to simplify it to those 5 steps to make it a bit easier to grasp. So at the beginning, obviously, you start your design system. So you create a project. You will have to have a place where it can live, for example, a GitHub repository, but this could also be your internal repository server for your company or your agency. But you will have to have one central place where it will live. And this is what you do first, deciding on where it will live and setting it up. The second step would be applying your design. So you will have some corporate design guidelines, some input from marketing or other people that designed this for you before, but in most cases, you also already have something defining your colors, your fonts and stuff like that. So you will use this to apply it to kickstartDS. So we have lots of tokens, lots of configurability, so you can put your values into there to have a first application of your design. Then you would set up your design system. So you would decide on which usage scenarios are important. So which add-ons will I want to use here? So what kinds of people will look at my storybook, for example? So which add-ons should be in there? This would be the configuration step. And then you would start adding components. And this is where you could think of the last step in the design system initiative. So you've done your inventories there, you have identified a set of components, you maybe already have your pilot project in mind. So the next step would be adding those components to your design system that you've identified before. And then finally, you would publish your design system. So this is also really important because the design system only ever can create value if people can use it. So it has to be accessible somewhere. This is what publishing means. And this, again, can mean different things for different organizations. For one, it might mean just pushing your latest release to a content delivery network so people can include your CSS and script tags on their page and just write markup. For others, it might mean installing an NPM package, having your React templates ready to go in there. So you just update your dependency locally when updating your version of the design system. So again, it can really depend. So to get more of a concrete idea of what this means, I want to jump over to our storybook. So this is the storybook we've created for kickstartDS. One important thing to note here is that what we're looking at is not one singular design system. This is the overview of everything inside the toolbox that kickstartDS offers, which you can use to build your design system. So you can't directly compare it to what we've looked at here with Shopify, because you won't, for example, have stuff about how text should be written, because this will differ for every client. So what you see here is just the toolbox. So you have a starting page which gives you some guidance on the different topics you can expect here. You have all those categories in here. You have stuff like the button to just quickly open it and to show one thing, because what we're looking at now is a branded button. See, it's in our own corporate design. So you might ask yourself, how would it look if it were not in our design already? And this is what you can see below here. You also have those base variants. So every component inside kickstartDS exists with all its structure set up, all those design decisions set up, but with really, I'm not sure if you can call it anonymous, but with a demo design, with a reduced black and white design. So everything in this button is our design application. So the second step we talked about before. This is where you add all this information to create your design system. So for us, it would be those colors here. This is our primary color. We have an inverted color for that primary color that gets used when you have a dark background. This is a concept that's pretty deeply baked into kickstartDS, so everything can be inverted, which is not the same as dark mode, but really inverted, I think. Yeah. We have spacings in here, everything you would need to create components. And we also have a, which oftentimes is really helpful in visualizing this, we have a Figma file which has all those tokens in it too. And I want to use this because, as I said, it's much more visual, to give you a quick look at how we do this. Because what you have here, I've opened the colors page now, so this would be the color definitions. And what you have here are basic scales. So this is like the palette for a painter, where all the colors are on there. He has every decision in front of him. And you have those semantic categories, for example, semantic background colors or semantic text colors. And those are values referencing this palette. So every value you will see here in the end gets referenced from here. For example, the primary color here defaults to primary default, whereas this one defaults to primary to background 2, which is this one, just as an example. So this is basically a mapping of those color scales to semantic tokens. And those tokens are what is used to create actual components in the end. So for example, if we go back to the card element, let's presume I would want to build a card component and I have some text that I want to place on that card component. Then I would look here, for example, the semantic text colors and see, okay, the absolute default text color would be this one. So I don't have to guess which color code it would be or something like that. I just have the definition here. Or maybe I have a text that's displayed on an interface, so the color could be different. So those are the semantic categories that really help bridge the design decision to something the developer can understand quickly and efficiently. And you can change colors without breaking expectations. Your designer could even change your primary color without your dev ever noticing, which is a great benefit of this abstraction, to divide the decisions into those base values and how they are mapped to semantic concepts. A bit easier to understand might be this one, where you still have a spacing scale, which is basic, and then you have different kinds of semantic spacings. So those spacings might influence how components are stacked or how stuff is stacked. So how it's vertically aligned, how big should the spacing between vertically stacked things be, or between inline elements that are displayed next to each other. So you have really tight control over those different sorts of spacings. And as a developer, you just have to look at what kind of spacing am I building? Is it stacking? Is it inline? And you will find the correct value in here without thinking about the scale behind. And this is what is done for all those categories here. So if you have those design tokens, and those, as I've said, they are set up for you, we have some helpers to help you in that too, to, for example, just enter your 6 to 10 branding relevant tokens into it and generating your token set. So this can be quite easily generated as a start, and then you can really fine tune it from there and influence all the different decisions. You could go into here and change all the colors if you wanted to have really fine-grained control. You will have good defaults by starting with this, but you won't ever be restricted by this. Every single value can be replaced by something that you need or like for this. So if you have design tokens, the obvious question would be, how do those get into components, or how does this relate? So having a look at the button again, we can open the sidebar here and have a look at this tab, which shows the component tokens. So basically, you have a structure of tokens that define how a component looks. So everything related to design and layout is encoded in tokens in the end. So in the best case, while styling your component, you won't ever have to touch the markup itself. You can just configure the pure component, if you will. So for example, this one would be a solid button in our design system. So you can have a look here. You see it's layered. We have some tokens that are used for every button. But for the solid button, which is here, you see we have overwritten values, for example, for the background color. And I can go in here and just choose a different value, for example, to test how it looks. And I could even have a look at different elements to see how this would affect it displayed in context in other components. So this is really how you can see the first glimpse of how it can be efficient to use something like this, because we've made a central change to the button and it's automatically reflected in all components using this button. And also you have those settings that are really easy to adjust to really make it into your own component. So those are the basic component tokens that you have as layering that are also already there for you. You can use them just as is, but you can also just change everything around here or add new tokens to it too. The next important thing that we think is at least really important to create good components is thinking about the structure of your component. We've called this component API before. And I think a good way to visualize this is this add-on we've installed, and it already spoils how we do it. We use JSON schema, so it's not something we've completely cooked up ourselves. It's a standard to describe structured data, more or less, JSON schema is. And we use it to write definitions for our components. So what you see here is one set of options used for that component. Which options are allowed would be described in the JSON schema. So for example, if I go in here for the variant, I have autocomplete. So it knows about the values that are allowed here. And I can just set them from here. And this is what's done by using the JSON schema, which has those definitions. It has the types of properties. It has description texts, if applicable. It has default values for you. And this is what enables having this in here, for example, being able to edit this quickly, to play around on this front. But it also, more importantly, enables those controls to be there for you. And I've talked about this being a workbench or a playground to really explore and experience components. And I'd say this is the heart of it, because this makes it configurable and you can just play with it. So you can just say, okay, I want to have an highlighted button, or it should be the solid button again, but I want to have some more decoration on it. Or maybe I want to have an icon after it. And maybe I even want a small animation on it. So this can all be pretty cool to get a feel for your component and to really understand how it's meant to be used, to be able to interact with those properties. And you can also have a look at the docs page, for example, to see the descriptions in a more compact way. So this can also really be interesting to show variants of your components. So for example, we have a main button or main call to action, which has this deco option set, whereas other primary buttons don't have that. This would be one simple example. And then we have, I've quickly opened it before, also complex components. This would also be one of the content components I've talked about before, where you really see where this can shine, because you could have elements like this. You can position the box where you want. You have lots of options to make it work for your use cases. And this is the next important thing to note here. I think you can see it already here, controls 50, that's way too much. And that's way too much complexity for your normal use case. And this is again, because we as the toolbox need to provide every option that could possibly be needed. In your use case, you would reduce that to the options that you really need. And maybe you wouldn't even call this a visual. Lots of people call this a hero element. So maybe you would call it a hero and you would say, okay, I need that text box. I really like that. I need the title and the text, but I don't need buttons. And I don't need to have the orientation options because it should always be on the bottom right. So this would mean you could map this component to a much more simple set of options for your use case. And this is how we typically advise people to use this tool. So you shouldn't just copy those components verbatim for your use, but really adopt them to your use, to your options that are needed. Yeah, so this is what you see with controls. So start getting on from here, you see also we have this variance, those variants for this component in here too. And also there you can see how different this can look. For example, switching to video, you can have a really different kind of element very quickly. For example, you could, if you would have wanted to have a nice element on your start page, could, for example, change this to be full screen height. You could add a small skip button in the end, which helps scroll down to the next part. You could put that box maybe into the center. So you're really flexible in creating elements that are always in sync with your design decisions, your atomic design token decisions, your decisions about how a button should look. It's all in lockstep when building interfaces this way. And we think that's really empowering too. It makes it easier, it's assuring, and it's really empowering.
And what we are convinced of, that this helps both parties mostly involved with design systems, being designers and front-end developers. Because for me, as I do have a design background, I nowadays mostly avoid designing in a design tool. I do use the code. I do use the markup to somehow flick together the next page I want to try out. And the great thing is that I have an output which is usable, which we then can take over into our, maybe the CMS for our website or whatsoever. It's something I can present someone for a user test, and he can click through it and it feels like the final product. And that is also a big value in regards to, let's say, prototyping, or just quickly get things out of the and on the road.
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe one aspect I've not talked about in regards to components before I try to wrap up this part by showing what you can build further than components, for example, in your design system here. I quickly want to show one thing here, because it's important to note, because I've talked about framework agnostic before, and you could ask the question, how have you done it? What was your decision when writing those components? What's your tech stack, so to say? And our tech stack is using React, and it's using React just for the templating. And this, in our view, really makes a difference, because still looking at this component here, this visual, and going back to the docs to have this show code. Let's go away. You can see, where is it? This is React code. This is really succinct code. You just enter the component and you directly enter the props that we've seen already. So this is a really cool way to work with it, but it needs you to use React in the end. You still won't have to use React on the client. That's the first important point to make, because in most projects we build with this, React is just used server-side. In the end, it generates HTML, and this is what gets loaded for the user. There's no need when using kickstartDS to use React. So all our styling is done in SCSS and in parallel to the component React template. All our JavaScript, all the behavior is written in a progressive enhancement way in vanilla ECMAScript, normal JavaScript. So you can just load your minimal JavaScript. It's a few kilobytes on your page later, and you won't have to load the React runtime just to have a working website with kickstartDS. And that's one thing that others are doing differently. So this is a differentiator, I would say. And I've talked about those legacy contexts where a design system might be needed. For example, your agency building that WordPress blog I've talked about before. They are not excluded here. I mean, sure, it's way easier to reuse this component inside React, so you would probably prefer it as a developer. But as someone working on WordPress, you will have to have HTML to integrate. And this is what you can see here. You can copy every component in kickstartDS as a pure HTML component. As long as your CSS and JavaScript is loaded in the head, for example, this will work by just copy pasting the code. It's pretty much like you would work with a bootstrap, for example. Yeah, so it's, at least to us, really important when you build a design system to at least have this as a fallback for those contexts where your main framework will not be the right one for the technical context. So this was one thing I wanted to quickly show. And as I've said, to maybe wrap it up here, for this demo part in our storybook, what we found, what is really useful next to having variance. Variance should show what's possible with the component. It should show the extremes that are made possible by the options. Recipes are more from the point of view of the user, so coming from the usage scenario. So maybe you want to have a call to action. It's not important to the user of the call to action is built with a storytelling element or a visual element or by using 3 buttons. He doesn't care about that. It's more about what you want to achieve with this. So those are recipes. So we have built up those recipes, and they're not even using the same components in the back, but they are trying to solve for the same user need. For example, building a call to action. And those are just meant as inspiration. Those are not canonical components of this design system. It's just inspiration for what can be built by combining those components. And this is really effective tool to give for your own design system inside your own organization, to give inspiration to people who want to build something with it, because it can be quite hard when you just look at buttons and form inputs to get an idea of what can be built or what should be built with that. And recipes really help close that gap. And at the end, you could even call those pages recipes. We have some demo pages in here with the same reasoning, just showing how the design system looks in context of, for example, a bigger landing page, or for example, in the context of a glossary entry that you have on your page. So those are all meant as examples. They are not meant as every glossary page should look like this, because that would be too granular for a design system. A design system just is concerned with providing the correct building blocks, not with delivering ready-made templates and pages normally. And maybe as a final link, I've quickly opened it in parallel, just to give you a quick overview how this can also look very differently. This is again kickstartDS, and we're looking at a different project we're currently working on, and it has quite a distinct different look and feel, I'd say, from everything we've looked at before when looking at kickstartDS. So this is something we often hear, that people say, okay, I understand what you've done, but I still think it will be super limiting and I won't ever be able to recreate the design that my clients really need. And we have a slightly different opinion. We think we did a pretty good job to pretty much enable all this variability on small design decisions up to big design decisions. Okay, that's